application to keep an eye on who's claiming to host something in your address space. I think that's about it for this particular set of demos. So I think I'll switch over to Paul Vixie. And I think we can turn off the projector now. So I don't think Paul's going to use slides.
Thank you, Robert. It's true I'm not going to use slides. I had some, but they were terrible, so I decided that rather than being distracted by them and not using them for anything, I would just talk. So this passive DNS stuff is very cool. I want to thank Florian. Again, he's not here, but he's been here. He's come to DEFCON before. Some of you know him, for coming up with this idea. And I want to admit, once again, when he first told me about it, I thought it was a terrible, terrible idea until I saw the ways that it could be used by e-crime fighters, whether law enforcement or freelance, to go find out who's doing what to whom. DNS is fairly often used for bad stuff. In fact, it is universally used for everything that happens on the internet, and so anything bad is also using DNS. It bothers me that people that are trying to hurt me get to use a protocol that I helped, I had a hand in, maybe some software, and they're using a global system that I'm helping to keep running in order to execute e-crime. So last time something like this bothered me was in the mid-90s when I created something called MAPS, which some of you may recognize as spam spelled backward. It was the Mail Abuse Prevention System. It's really unlikely that any of you has ever before now been in a room with somebody who's been sued more than I have. And that's a result of me publishing reputation data about SMTP servers. And other people subscribing to that reputation data, which we called an RBL, they would subscribe to that either by BGP or with DNS and tell their sendmail or postfix or whatever, gee, if it appears on Vixie's list, then you can just bounce all mail that comes from there. And the problem is that the people that were on my list didn't want their mail to be bounced, and they found that stopping the spam that was coming from their networks was hard, whereas suing me was easy. Anyway, my wife has assured me that this won't happen again. So as a result of sort of all that, 10, 12 years later, we sold MAPS. They're still selling the old RBL. There are probably 100 other RBL-like things. I guess the new name for them is the DNSBL, but it'll always be an RBL to me because that's what we called it. And we're all getting as much spam as we ever got. So I've noted that email is less reliable than it used to be. A lot of false positives. A lot of people have abandoned RBLs in place and put a wildcard in there so that their subscribers bounce everything until they stop subscribing. I will tell you that the really, really oldest RBL, the very first one, is called rbl.maps.vix.com. We only used that name for about 6 months. And then we got mailabuse.org or whatever and started using that. That's in Vix.com. And people still send queries to it 12 years later, 12 years after it was turned off. It's rather frustrating. I suppose I could wildcard it and then they would all bounce all their mail, but that seems rude. So instead I collect the data and I give it to the passive DNS effort. Anyway, noting again that e-criminals need DNS as much as the rest of us do. And not only do they need DNS, they need it to work as well for bad guys as for good guys. I have decided to try again, except this time we're not going to create a reputation feed that is subscribed to by email servers. No. We're going to create a reputation feed that is subscribed to by recursive DNS servers. The things we're going to black hole this time will not be the IP addresses of other people's mail servers. They will be the domain names that the bad guys need for e-crime. So if you go to our website, www.isc.org, you'll see that while Robert was talking, I hit the publish button on a blog entry that describes all this. We're also headed for a Q&A room after this if you'd like to talk more about it then. But just to hit the high points on it, we will not be sued. ISC is a nonprofit 501c3. We do not like being sued, so we're not going to publish any content. I know where a lot of bad domains are, thanks to Robert, but I am not going to make a list of them and publish them because that's the way you get sued. Instead, we are going to publish patches. In fact, we have just published patches for Bind 9, so that if you're running a Bind 9 recursive name server, you can apply what is about a 600-line unidiff and get a new feature, which is to subscribe to a response policy zone. Yes, we are going to use DNS zones as a way to propagate sort of policy and reputation information about other DNS names. It's a lot like the RBL in that sense. It doesn't slow the name server down. It has not caused any crashes or core dumps in the last couple of weeks anyway. It will be... No cert advisories yet, it's not my code. Let me think what else. The spec is open, no patents, no license, no nothing. Anybody else, any other recursive name server operator, and nominum, I'm talking about you, who wants to implement this can do so without having to pay any tithe. We have talked to a bunch of content providers. There's something out there called an RHSBL. It was, I guess, first popularized by Jeff Chan of Serble, but it is like an RBL, except it refers to the stuff after an @ sign rather than before the @ sign or whatever. I'm not sure what the right hand refers to. But anyway, it's lists of bad domain names. Spamhaus has one, Serble has one, a bunch of other companies have them. They didn't have a distribution channel for it, now they do. They're going to be able to use this, because we're creating a single universal format that any recursive DNS server could implement and any reputation provider can publish with, in order to have it be that if somebody is doing something bad from a certain domain name, and if any of your users are using, let's say, Windows, and if they click on it, they will become infected, and you can't stop them because we are all just barely evolved monkeys and we will click on anything that moves, you can make sure that the DNS won't work, so that when they click on it, nothing will happen for them. I hate that we have to do it this way, but since we have to do it this way, I've decided to make it possible, make it easier, and to launch yet another multi-billion-dollar industry which I will not monetize in any way. My wife has asked me questions about that too. So, we have some time for questions, either about Robert's stuff, which I think is really interesting, or my stuff, which I think is sort of interesting. How many minutes? We got 12 more minutes. So, this room is much more full than I expected because the EFF party went until 4 a.m., so you must not have been there. And they're talking about this cool badge in some other room, and I thought all of you would be in there listening to that. Maybe there was no room. Anyway, I'm hoping that there are questions. We have time. Question?
He asked about covert channels via the DNS. We do notice what appears to be covert channels that are conducted over the DNS, and these happen to be really annoying for us. So when we find them, we tend to blacklist them so that they don't enter the database, because they obviously have the potential to evade the cache, because all of the names and data are unique. So we don't want to take anyone's YouTube downloads via DNS and shove them into a database. We haven't really tried to discover covert channels using the passive DNS data, using the raw data itself. As I mentioned, I'm not a security researcher. I just build tools that security researchers can use. So I'm afraid I don't have any really hot examples for you. Any other questions?
Wait a minute.
Oh, okay.
I want to follow up on that answer. So we've described a database that was built on a bunch of passive DNS stuff. It turns out that the raw data was our original product. The Security Information Exchange is an Ethernet switch full of UDP broadcast traffic. So all the data that we get from our sensors, we play as UDP broadcasts on a sort of an Ethernet switch that's in our data center. And then we listen for that on another port on the same switch. And we invite other people to come plug their computers in and listen to that. So it's basically a tap point on our raw data stream. We not only take the raw data, but after we've run it through various filters like deduplication or this QR stuff or various filters, are also touching down on VLANs on this private switch. Somebody who is in our data center and plugs a computer into our switch is able to see not just the raw data, but as we process it and rebroadcast it, they can see it as it gets more and more refined.
Intermediate products.
The intermediate products, thank you. So we hoped that that's all we would have to do and that somebody else would come build this database. In fact, I hoped Florian would come build a database because we have a lot more data than he had, and he was good at building databases, but he's kind of on to other projects by now. So we have built a database, but if you really wanted to look for covert channels, the raw data is right there. If you're a commercial entity, we will charge you a port fee. On the other hand, if you're a university researcher or a hobbyist or whatever, and we can vet you, we will probably waive the port fee because we want this data to get used. So as far as covert channel detection, the fact that we're not doing it should not cause you to think it cannot be done. We have more passive DNS data than anybody, and we're going to keep doubling it every year until Moore's Law explodes. More questions about anything?
We have a bulk query question. Oh, sure. He asked if there was automated queries, and we do have an interface for doing bulk automated queries. It's via a simple HTTP RESTful type interface. You construct a URL and download it, and it will give you back either JSON or some binary format, or we can even convert it to an ad hoc text format. But yes, we actually implemented that bulk interface before we did the web interface. And if you and at some point we'll be able to allow external entities to query that interface. Any more questions? That's a good question. Yes, when it will be available. We will probably start up a beta period right now, and we're interested in reaching out towards people that are interested in hacking on a beta type interface. Fellow in the back.
You mentioned that for your RSS you filter 50%. Is that, what is in that 50% that you're filtering?
He asked, what is in the 50% of the data? Sorry? Okay. Yes, what is in the 50% of the data that we throw away? The big thing that I noticed when I was building this is spamhouse.org generates a lot of data because it doesn't follow the usual distribution of data that it normally gets. A typical DNS. Okay. You'll typically see about an 80 to 90% cache hit ratio for your typical DNS server, but certain zones in particular generate a huge number of unique queries. And Spamhouse is a very good example because it's a DNSBL and it's the key that's being queried is an IP address, and botnets are constantly generating all of these different queries. And then once I had done that, I had implemented a blacklist that allows us to exclude certain domains and subdomains from further processing. And then I looked, then I started sorting by the domains that were generating the most data. And I found things. I believe Yahoo has a load balancer that chucks a ton of address records into a query, and there's this combinatoric explosion of different possibilities, and that was such a large volume.